War. Now keep in mind, why did the South pull out? Why did they pull out of the Union right before this time period? Anyone remember? Someone else, raise your hand, raise your hand. 211. Chris, I'm sorry, Ethan. I'm sorry.
Why did they pull out?
Yeah, why did South Carolina decide we're leaving and pull out?
Abraham Lincoln.
Yes, because they freaked out basically that Abraham Lincoln was the president. Now, Abraham Lincoln was of what party? Quentin?
Democratic.
He was what?
Me?
Republican. So, now keep in mind, what was the Republican Party mainly against, Chris? Slavery. You're right. So, because of that, whenever the South saw Abraham Lincoln is elected, he's a Republican. Republicans are against slavery. We're leaving. So they decided we're going to go ahead and just pull out at this point. So that's why we're starting official off with the Civil War. All right. Now keep in mind, was Abraham's original intent with his first annual address? What was he addressing? What did he say in regards to slavery of the South right then?
He was not going to cross it.
Yeah, he was saying, he was saying, okay, I have no intention of disrupting slavery where it already exists. He was hoping future on that they would address it. He's saying, I'm not going to go through and free all the slaves right now. That's not the purpose. We will address it as we're going on. Just stay together and we'll figure it out. We're going to make it work. But the South decided, no, can't do it. We're leaving. And so that's why a lot of the South pulled out. South Carolina pulled out first, and then a lot of the other southern states pull out as well. We're going to talk about key dates and let you know as we go through this section, like the start of the Civil War. We will talk about that in just a second. What? Did you look at the date? You said 1812.
Yeah.
So, what?
It's not 19. What am I saying?
It's not 19. Okay,
That's
okay,
a grind.
we will get into it. But it's part of the reason, that's one of the dates you need to know. So again, you have this table at the front of your book, but we're going to flip around in just a second because it's important to know which states are part of the South and which states are part of the North as well. Who wants to read the quote from Abraham Lincoln at the top of the page?
Let's all time remember that all American citizens are better than the common country and shall be well together in the bounds of their own.
Let's read it a little slower and a little bit clearer so like Brecken
Let
and
us
Amy can
at
hear.
all times remember that all American citizens are brothers of a common country and should dwell together in the bonds of fraternal feeling.
Good job. So Abraham Lincoln. So he said, okay, look, we're all Americans. We need to work it out. Instead of the idea of brother against brother or father against son or uncle against nephew. That's probably the reason why people are so angry right after the Civil War. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on. That's the reason why whenever we look at the Reconstruction period, it's one of the most horrible times in our history because people are just angry, and so they're taking it out on their fellow Americans because they've lost a brother or a father or a nephew, and they're hurting and they're sad and grieving, but they're going to make the other side pay for it. And so that's the reason why right after the war, it's really rough because everyone's mad at everybody else. Alright, so war begins at Fort Sumter. So we'll go ahead and look at it that there are two forts that the South had not taken over. Now remember, whenever the South seceded or pulled out, they took over a lot of the forts in the Southern Territory. They took over the New Orleans Mint, so they're getting a head start. President Buchanan, he just told them, you can't leave. We can't make you stay either, but you can't leave. And that's all President Buchanan did at the time before Abraham Lincoln got sworn in as president. So Buchanan didn't really do anything. So because of that, the South had a big head start in getting ready for war in case it was going to happen. Yes?
So who ended up winning? Did anyone win?
What do you mean, the Civil War? We would say that the North won because the South, Robert E. Lee, surrendered, and so he was one of the last major generals of the South to surrender. So we would say, okay, that the North won, and so that's why that's why the Southern states are not part of the Confederacy anymore, is they're back part of the Union. But I don't know, and of course, slavery before all the slaves were freed, so that happened as well. But I don't know if you would say, like, we got anything really good out of it, besides, okay, slavery was abolished, so that was a good thing. But it was the idea of we didn't really get territory because our country. Lots of people died. We're going to talk about how many people died. It's horrendous. Because basically every person that dies in the Civil War is an American. So it's basically killing off your entire nation. It's horrible with our
Is it more than Vietnam?
I don't know, Vietnam dragged on for so long. Vietnam might have more, but at this time, this war was the most costly war in American history, if I remember correctly. So because of that, it's horrible. Then that's the reason why Americans were so upset afterwards, because we didn't gain any land, we didn't get any type of like monetary gain from it. The slaves were freed, so that was good. But there was a lot of dead people, so there was a lot of people that were just grieving because they lost someone important to them. That's why people were so hateful right after the Civil War. Alright, so there were two forts that did not fall to the Union forces that were part of the South Territory. Fort Pickens in Pensacola, Florida, and Fort Sumter. Fort Pickens ends up never falling to the South. They stayed part of the Union the entire time. Has anyone ever been to Fort Pickens in Pensacola, Florida? Alright, so Ethan has, I have. It's cool. It's a fort. It's on a beach. So it's interesting. It's not super exciting today, but I mean it's cool to go see. But Fort Pickens, they make it the entire time as part of the Union. The South does not end up taking that one over. Fort Sumter, that does. Okay.
The north ended up losing 360,000 and the south
Yeah.
was 260.
It's a
That doesn't
lot.
sound that bad.
I mean, if you, I don't know if you go to the,
Compared to the
That's
World War
just
II.
620.
yeah, it's a lot of people. So that's over 500,000 people that died and are basically Civil War in and of
This
itself.
coronavirus has killed 250.
Yeah, you can think of it that way too as well.
Think
Right.
about that.
We gotta keep going though. Alright, so your book points out Fort Sumter, that this one is at Charleston, South Carolina. Now, Robert Anderson, he was the major in charge of Fort Sumter, and he reported to Lincoln saying, hey, I only have 1 month's provisions left. You need to send me supplies. But keep in mind, why couldn't Robert Anderson just go out and just buy supplies?
Money.
Okay, not quite.
Surrounded by the South.
Yeah, he's surrounded by basically enemy territory. He can't just go out, excuse me, I need to buy guns and ammunition and bullets. They won't sell it to him. So he said, okay, he wrote to Abraham Lincoln saying, hey, I need supplies. You need to come back and give me supplies and ammunition for it. So, look at Lincoln. He sent word to the governor of South Carolina saying, hey, I'm supplying the fort. Why didn't Abraham Lincoln just send the troops into South Carolina to go supply them?
Because they had to go through the south.
Yeah, what would the South think if Abraham Lincoln just sent an army basically of supplies through it?
They were against, he was against them.
Yeah, that he's basically invading them. So he's saying, hey, I'm going into your territory. I'm bringing my fort supplies. That's what I'm doing. I'm not invading you. I'm just bringing them supplies and then we're pulling out. So Abraham Lincoln is behaving with honor, saying, hey, we're just reinforcing them. We're giving them supplies.
Why didn't you reinforce the south?
What? The South didn't be, remember the South did not
Oh,
be
yeah, they
Abraham
weren't
Lincoln as the
part of the
president.
United
So
States.
they were saying they had their own president. So he's saying, hey, I'm going to your territory. I'm doing my fort and that's it. It's going to be okay. So he was behaving with honor, saying, okay, I'm letting you know what we're doing. Now, the South decided, do we want the fort to get supplies? Now, keep in mind, they only know this because Abraham Lincoln gave them a heads up. And so the South decided, yeah, we don't want that fort to get supplies. We're going to go ahead and attack them and take the fort. So, General B.C. Beauregard, make a note for him as one of the major generals of the South. You're going to notice there's several generals for both sides, so make sure that you know which general is for which. Now, they all seem American, but there's the Southern generals, and then there's the Northern generals. So make sure you keep back which one is which. So, this is a Southern general. So, B.G.T. Beauregard. Make a note of him. It's a French name, so Beauregard, make a note for him. That he was sent to go attack the Fort Sumter before it got its supplies back. This marks the official start of the Civil War. So, make a note for this one. So, it is April 12th, 1861. So, make a note for that as the official start of the Civil War. Sometimes you hear it called War Between the States or the War of Secession. There's other names for it. We're just going to call it just the Civil War, but there's other terms for it. Just make a note for that. So, April 12th, 1861. That's the official start for it. So, your book points out that he tried, Major Anderson, he hung on to it for about 2 days, but they're running out of ammunition and supplies, so he couldn't do anything at that point. So the fort was lost and was taken by the South.
They all died.
Wait, what?
They all died.
I don't think so. They didn't do that a lot at the start of the war. It was viewed as kind of like a gentleman's war, where the idea of they're not taking it super seriously, either side. We're going to see it. They killed people, which again, war is war. People will die. So that's probably the reason why people viewed Sherman as kind of crazy. We'll talk about Sherman later on. But Sherman realized this is war. If you have a war drag out a long time, what's going to happen? It gets worse and more people die. So Sherman says, this is war. You need to end this as fast as humanly possible. We don't need to keep dragging this out. So it was more of a I slap you, you slap me type of start at the war, where it's like, oh, we're doing this, but we're not very serious about it. Lincoln was serious about it, because Lincoln said we need to hurry up and end this as quickly as possible. And you're going to see that Lincoln starts rotating through his generals. Lincoln has a hard time finding a good Northern general for a long time. But that's probably the reason why Lincoln, you keep seeing him replace the generals in charge over and over again, because he gets frustrated because his generals aren't doing a very good job, at least in his mind, trying to lead the Union Army. So, taking out though, that this is whenever the Civil War officially starts off for. Now, your book points out that there's a couple different ideas as to why the Civil War started. Originally, it was not about slavery, because remember, was he going to free the slaves originally? No. So a lot of cases, a lot of people assume that slavery was the major issue of the Civil War. Technically not. Based on what we've discussed so far, what is the major issue of the what's the major issue of the Civil War? Alright, so why does the South view why do they want to hang on to slavery so bad? Yeah, that's how they make the money, and that's why. So they're saying it's legal in our area. So it's the idea of if we want to do it, if we make it legal, we decide it should be okay. So it's the idea of states' rights. If we want to make it legal, we can. Versus the idea of can the federal government tell us what to do. So that's the original kind of starting point for it. Now, Abraham Lincoln, he also viewed it as, okay, could you as a state leave the Union? That question had not been decided by this point. This is the first time we have a state actually follow through and actually leave the Union. So this is the first time we've had a state do this. So it brings up the question, can you have a state actually do that? Lincoln said no. The United States was a permanent binding contract, and you can't have a state just leave unless the other states approve it. So he's saying no, you can't just decide, I'm unhappy, I'm not part of the United States anymore. Okay, that's unhealthy for a country, was it? What?
As government, today they could technically have this solo, right?
No, we make it like
Because they
illegal
can-
in this time
all
period.
lot of states can come together and just.
I mean,
And
you
then try to
could,
fight
but you
back.
would have another war again, because that's what Abraham Lincoln's saying is, okay, no, you can't do that, it's illegal. It's actually really smart, because Abraham Lincoln viewed it as, okay, no, you have been taken over by a rebellious military organization, because that would allow the South to come back in easily. Because how do you have a state form up today? Anyone know? How do you have a state join the Union? Yeah, the Senate has to, Congress has to approve it, and then also the state has to submit basically a constitution for their state saying here's the laws of our state. Now Lincoln knew, okay, if the South pulls out officially, to come back in, the Senate would have to approve them, or the House, or the Congress would have to approve them again. Who's gonna be the only people left in the House if the South pulls out? Yeah, the Northerners. And so he would say, okay, if you pull out officially, you have to come back in this way. You have to come in with basically the other side, the enemy side's permission. That sets up a very awkward and potentially bad situation. So no, you did not leave. Your organization, your state has been taken over by what he said is a rebellious military organization. You're still part of the Union. You did not leave. You are still here. And so he was hoping this would help blend the country back together a lot smoother, which he was right, it would have. We're going to see at the end of the Civil War just how petty the North and South are being to each other. And it was partly because some of the Northerners were trying to stick it to the South and trying to hurt them on purpose for it. So that's what Lincoln said, nope, you can't leave. You have to stay. And no, the South did not leave either for it. As the war progresses, this is whenever Abraham Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation, and that's whenever he officially frees the slaves in the South. Now, that was really smart and that was ingenious, because we're going to talk about several border states that never fully swapped over into the South side, but they had slaves. So Abraham Lincoln was trying to appease the abolitionists without causing more of an issue. That's the reason why we associate slavery with the Civil War. Now, keep in mind, did the South have to listen to what Abraham Lincoln said was freeing all the slaves? Genesis.
Yes.
Why? Is he the president of the South whenever they seceded? No. So it's one of those, Abraham Lincoln can say as much as he wants. The South doesn't view him as their president. So Abraham Lincoln says it, and he freed all the slaves in the South, but the South goes, well, that doesn't matter. We're not part. You're not our president. But it helped lend a moral cause to the Civil War. It helped them associate slavery with it. The South, they view the U.S. Constitution as a compact. Make a note of that term, because we haven't talked about a compact quite like this yet. This is a treaty between independent nations to act as a group. So they said, since we voluntarily joined the Constitution of the Union, we can voluntarily pull out. And so this is just a different mindset. So it's the idea of deciding which idea wins out. Can you leave the Constitution or the Union, or can you not leave the Constitution for it? Whenever, your book also points out whenever several states issued declaration of causes and for their secession, they cited resentment towards the North's failure to enforce the Fugitive Slave Act. They were saying that the North was not sitting back there escaped slaves on purpose, which the North probably wasn't, because most of the North was abolitionists. Not all of them were abolitionists, but a good chunk of them were. And they were saying, no, we're not sending the slaves back. We're going to let you stay here. So a lot of them were. They objected to the election of a Republican president because they felt like that their way of life was threatened. They had tariff disputes, and they basically said it's the idea of states' rights. We view ourselves as basically a separate country, and we're choosing to work together as the Confederate States. Alright, so your book points out there are several border states that also pull out as well with the South. So originally you had the states down here in the deep South pull out. So now you have these more northern states pull out as well. You have Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas. You have these pull out officially as well. Now, Virginia has such a strong split. This is whenever Virginia splits into West Virginia and Virginia. That's why there is no East Virginia. If you ever wondered why there's West Virginia and no East Virginia, that's because Virginia was one state and it split into the West, because the West was more for staying with the Union. Alright, these border states, these ones up here, they actually never fully pull out of the Union. So you have Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, and Delaware. These have slavery in them, but they said, I don't know if I want to leave the Union. I think I'm going to stay put. But if it becomes about making slavery illegal, we're out. So that's probably the reason why they specifically said the slaves in the South are free, not just those slaves. He let those stay there because he said, okay, no, I don't want those 4 states to pull out either. So he said, okay, no, this is not about slavery originally. So the South, if you're in the South as the Confederate States, those slaves are free, but the slaves in the border states, they're not. So that's one of the reasons as to how come the Civil War was not just primarily just about freeing the slaves. A lot of people assume that's what it was about, but it was mainly the idea of states' rights. Who decides for the section of the country? The state, or can the federal government tell them what to do? Alright, do you make a note of those border states? They actually stay loyal to the Union the entire time. They don't ever actually pull out. So make a note of those 4 border states. Alright, there are several advantages of the North and several advantages and disadvantages of the South as well for it. So, thinking about it with the North, anyone think they would know what's an advantage that the North has?
Almost everything.
Okay, like what?
Money.
Okay, they have more money, you're right.
Industry.
They have more people, they have more industry. Anything else?
Guns.
They have more ammunition, so more factories, they can make supplies. What?
Supplies.
Supplies. So yeah, your book points out, basically, if you look at the chart, you'll notice, wow, they have a bunch of stuff. So population, land area, railroads. Now, we haven't talked about railroads yet all that much. Why are railroads in particular really important? Transportation. Now, we haven't talked about the building of railroads. The major decade for the railroads is the 1830s, so a lot of the railroad lines have already been built around this time period. So it's not just waterways anymore important, railroad lines. That's how come a lot of your battles take place next to railroad stations, because who controls the railroad station controls what direction and what trains can run through it. That's how come a lot of your battles take place next to junctions or next to railroad stations, because that's a major way of supplying your forces. So railroad lines, factories, industrial workers, value of farmland, value of livestock. So basically the North had basically everything else for them. Now keep in mind, the South had advantages as well. Does anyone think they know what would be a Southern advantage?
Food.
They did have a lot of food. Now keep in mind, a lot of the people of the South, they could go fight and they could leave other people to work their farms. What were the people they were leaving behind? Yeah, so a lot of cases, a lot of the men of the South, they would know, okay, I'm going to leave my farm because my slaves still got this, and I'm going to go fight in the army and go drive off north. A lot of cases, this was also the Southern territory. So again, why is it beneficial for someone to fight in their own territory? If it's your territory, how well do you know it?
Your home.
Very well. So they're fighting in a lot of cases in their own sections, in their own territory. Because remember, the South is not invading the North to try to leave. The South says, we're pulling out. Bye. And so the North is saying, okay, we're going to try to make you stay put. So in a lot of cases, it's the South that's getting invaded, not necessarily the North. So the South knew how to fight in their climate and their land, so they have home field advantage. Okay.
So what would happen if the South had invaded
We would be possibly, again, I'm not God, so I can't see possible, like, various, like, aspects of, like, what if sections of history. Personal opinion, we probably, if the South won, we would be 2 independent nations. We would have survived World War I. Maybe. I do not think we would have survived World War II because Hitler was so highly organized, and I don't think we would have made it as United States either side. So maybe the North might still would have made it, but I doubt it. I think we would have lost World War II, and we would be part of Germany or Japan today. So it is a good thing long term that the North won, at least in my opinion, it was a good thing that the North won. Now again, the South gets devastated and lots of bad things happen to either side, so the Civil War was not a good thing in and of itself, but it is good that we ended up staying together. Alright, so your book points out that both sides had a lot of military leaders though, so again, you need to note the generals for both sides. So the Union leaders was Grant, Sherman, McClellan, Burnside, Meade, those are some of the important ones. For the South, we have Davis, Lee, Jackson. So a lot of these people had experience in the Mexican War, and so now they're fighting each other. It's kind of awkward, and some of these gentlemen went to school together to be military leaders, and now they're fighting each other. So that's kind of an awkward situation. That's part of the trouble of the Civil War, is you have your own countrymen fighting each other. Alright, anybody have questions about this before we move on? Alright, so early events of the war. So originally the Union decided, okay, we're going to basically treat this as 2 kind of separate sections. There's the eastern side of the country and the western side. They're using the Appalachian Mountains to divide up the South. Why do you think they want to divide up the South into different sections and take it one section at a time?
It's easier that way.
Yeah, and remember that was the British mindset as well with the War for Independence. That logic is actually really good. So they're saying, okay, we're going to divide up into sections, we're going to take it over in different sections, and then slowly take over the South that way for it. One of the major ideas was to capture Richmond, Virginia. Did you make a note for that one? That was the capital of the Confederacy. So that was like Washington, D.C. for the North. This is the capital of the Confederacy. So Richmond, Virginia. Make a note of that. And then they said, okay, we're going to use the Appalachian Mountains to divide the South into East and West, and then we're going to use the Mississippi River to divide it farther. They were hoping later on that they would use the Tennessee River Valley in Georgia to further divide it apart. And they also wanted to use a naval blockade to cut off supplies to the South. Why do you think they wanted to cut off supplies to the South, like in Georgia and the Mobile area?
Make an empire.
Because did we have a lot of factories? Well, did the South have a lot of factories? So where would we have to get our supplies from for like guns and ammunition? Ports. And we were hoping, the South was hoping at this period that England would help them out, because remember, England was already going through their textile revolution. And if you're going to use a lot of textiles, what do you need a lot of? Cotton. So the South's original idea was, okay, hopefully England or Great Britain will help us out with this, so that way they can still get their cheap cotton for it. That's part of the reason why the North said, nope, we're blockading this right off. We don't want you to get help. Alright, so this is one of the first major battles with the first Battle of Bull Run. There's 2 battles, so this is the first one. Now, they weren't fighting just at the Battle of Bull Run or the creek called Bull Run. They were fighting because Manassas Junction, or the railroad station, was really close to it. Why do you think that they didn't fight directly at Manassas Junction?
Because they were destroying the building.
Yes. So a lot of cases it happens around it, not directly in it, because no one wants to actually destroy the junction either. So they say, okay, we're going to fight somewhere around it. So looking over at the map, your book has just not a little bit farther on, but I just want to show you. This is Bull Run, right up here in this section. This is Washington, D.C. Now, the South was viewing it as, we just want to leave the Union. That's how come the South, even though the South won the Battle of Bull Run, they did not just march over and go take Washington, D.C. because they're deciding what?
And they weren't ready for it either.
Yeah, the North was not ready at all. Lincoln freaks out whenever Lincoln realizes what happened, because Lincoln realized, what happened? What? And so Lincoln, that's one reason why Lincoln replaces his general, because he goes, you lost? They're right there! They could have marched over and taken over Washington, D.C., but they didn't, because the South is just doing it as, we just want to leave. Leave us alone. Now, that doesn't make the South more right, but it's the idea of the South is saying, we just want to be let go. Later on, that philosophy changes as the war drags on, because people are dying, but the South is just saying, I just want to just leave, just let us go. Well, the North is saying, no, you can't leave, you have to stay put. So, make a note. So, the Battle of Bull Run. Now, make a note though that the Union General was, Iron McDowell. Make a note for him. Now, he was fighting Beauregard. Now, Beauregard, you should already note for his name. What did Beauregard do? What fort did he take over? You want to remember? Sumter. So again, this is the same general. So the Southern generals are pretty good. This is also their home territory, so that's why they know it so well. So he's fighting to take over Manassas Junction. So this becomes the first Battle of Bull Run, because there's another one later on. So just make a note, first Battle of Bull Run. So the Confederate troops were almost defeated, but they had two generals reinforce Beauregard. So Joseph E. Johnson and Thomas Day Jackson. Anyone know what Jackson's nickname is? You probably remember this more from junior. Stonewall Jackson, do you remember why?
Because it was standing like a stone wall.
Yeah, your book has the quote as well for it, where somebody shouted to his men, we think it was a Confederate general, but we're not sure which one. Look, there's Jackson and his Virginians standing like a stone wall against the enemy. That's how he got the nickname Stonewall Jackson. Does anyone remember how Stonewall Jackson dies later on? It's pretty close. It's not immediately after this, but it's a little bit later on. Okay.
And he got shot by his own man.
Yeah, because one of the people on standing guard was nervous and they heard him moving around in the dark and they shot him because they didn't know who it was. But again, so Stonewall Jackson was an important figure for a long time. Alright, so so this is the Battle of Manassas Junction, our first Bull Run. Now, this is whenever the North realized, oh, this is going to take a lot longer than we originally thought. So the federal government, they called up for 500,000 troops for a 3-year service, saying, okay, we need to actually get an actual army. This is not going to be a quick and easy couple battles and we're done. No. This is going to be a lot longer. But keep in mind, thinking about long term, would a long war benefit the North or benefit the South? Genesis. I'll take your question. Okay.
Stand up.
Yes. Alright, and then, would a long war benefit the North long term or the South long term? The North, because they have more supplies, more people, more ammunition. So the longer the war lasts, the more beneficial it is from the North. It starts to swing to their favor. Now, it's still not good. People are still dying. But it's the idea of, okay, that the North has more supplies. So long term, the North will probably do better for it. Alright, so whenever Lincoln realized that, oh, I need a stronger general, he replaces Irwin McDowell, and he replaces him with George B. McClellan. So make a note for him. So George B. McClellan, that he is the second general for Lincoln. So you're going to notice Lincoln goes through like 4 or 5 of them, just because Lincoln's trying to find someone who can be a good general for his Union troops and actually lead them well. Alright, anyone have any questions about the first Battle of Bull Run? Alright, so looking at it with the naval blockade. So President Lincoln's also saying, okay, we need to blockade the South to prevent them from getting supplies from the British or someone else. So he sits down at David Farragut. Make a note for him. It looks like Farragut. We don't really say it that way, so just make a note for it. So David Farragut, that he would sit down to go capture Mobile Bay. Alright, has anyone been to Mobile Bay, Alabama?
Mobile Bay?
Yeah,
I
like Mobile.
I have.
Yeah,
I
so
haven't been to the Bay, but I've been to Mobile.
yeah, so that's a major port city. Again, not quite as important as New Orleans, but he said, okay, that's a major port, so we need to take over. So David Farragut, he was actually successful in capturing it, and he's able to kind of hang on to it for a long time. So make a note for him. So David Farragut, he captured Alabama's Mobile Bay and took possession of the Confederate vessels harbor there. Now, we start to have the ironclad battles. This is kind of an early version of submarines. Now, keep in mind, anyone know what war our submarines officially kind of started being used with?
It's like the World War II, right?
Not quite.
Oh,
Not quite. What?
One?
This is whenever we start to have them really show up for it. So, this is kind of like an early version. So, it can't be submerged yet, but if you look at the picture, now that's drawing of them. But these are basically how low that they would go in the water, to where they're basically almost entirely submerged. Now they can't go all the way down and back up, but it's the idea of they're really, really low in the water. Why is it good for your ship to be very low in the water like this?
So you're not seen.
Yeah, and you're hard to hit as well. So because of that, they're basically flat or level with the water. So this is whenever we start to see the ironclad battles, or these types of ships, when they start fighting as well. Alright, really quick, I want to read about George B. McClellan at the top of the page, and then we'll stop there. Alright, who wants to read first? Ethan.
George Brington McClellan was a military officer whose life was one of service, hard work, and intelligence. However, McClellan is most remembered for his defeats Confederate General Lee. He graduated second in a class at West Point and played an active part in the Mexican War. After leaving the military, he worked as the chief engineer at a railroad and later became the president of the railroad company. When the Civil War began, McClellan returned to active duty, eventually taking command of the Army of Potomac. And in November of 1861, after the first battle of Bull Run, McClellan's leadership helped to create a formidable army and restore the Union's morale.
Good job. Where do you want to go next?
Me.
Alright, Genesis.
In 1864, McClellan ran for president in high hopes of winning because the repeated Union losses at the beginning of the war were affecting Lincoln's popularity. Habit ever changed in the Union favor. McClellan lost much more by a resounding margin. McClellan was retired from service once again and soon served one term as governor of New Jersey.
Alright, last paragraph, wants to read it?
Me.
We'll let Quentin read it.
Also, Jersey was appreciated and revered him as a leader. His caring spirit toward his soldiers and his strong Christian faith led him to issue an order to his army to observe the Sabbath. He believed that the war should be conducted upon the highest principle known to Christian civilization, and he held firm to that belief.
Good job. Alright, now keep in mind, you might have glossed over that really quickly, but what year did Abraham Lincoln become president? 1860. So this is one of Lincoln's generals running against him in the election of 1864. So, who won in 1864? Lincoln again. But Lincoln goes, you're one of my generals and you ran against me? I don't know about this. This is
Did he run a
awkward.
Democrat?
What?
Did he run a Democrat?
No, but he ran basically as a rival to Lincoln. Lincoln's like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? And so it's a little bit obvious what reason.
Well,
You're
he
putting
fired
it
twice.
nice. Yeah, your book puts it nicely as Lincoln retires from service once again. It was basically you need to go. You need to get out of here. I don't know if I want to use
He
it.
fired him twice, so.
Yeah, your book's putting it really positively, but Lincoln was not that happy with what we're calling. Alright, for your homework. Alright, read pages 214 to page 220. We talked through some of those already. 214, 220. Answer on page 220, questions 1 through 9. On page 220, questions 1 through 9.
If he was
Bye, have a good day.
214.